Awesome. So how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. It's a nice Sunday here in just north of Toronto in Ontario, Canada.
Hmm.
It's a little sort of rain, quiet rain, but it's nice because I always put a garden in. So
Oh, that's good.
yeah, I managed to get my peppers, my tomatoes in,
Oh, good stuff. Vegetable
Ooh.
garden.
all that survivalist stuff.
Oh yeah, got to be ready for that apocalypse.
Yeah, so I'm having a great day. Finally got some time, and I've been having a couple of busy weeks lately with all sorts of things, and of course, spring is always busy in the industry. So
Right. Well, thanks for taking
yeah,
the time to talk to us. I really appreciate it.
hey man, I love it. I love doing this kind of thing, and it's great to connect like this too, rather than just sort of emails and Twitter and thing, which is always nice. But it's always great to hear voices.
Right.
We're really excited because we have Dutch on our phone. That's cool. That's super cool.
Exactly, man. Yeah, and the whole, I mean, that whole experience with T-Bone and Far Cry, sort of morphing into Far Cry 5. Um,
Yeah.
because working with Ubisoft, often, we come up with projects that either we're working on one project and they're already starting on another project. So it was nice the timing worked out on that, and just the response, always, you guys know that too, like in terms of the fan base and the gamers and the whole world, it's
Hmm.
so responsive and so kind of instant. So I was very honored to play Dutch, and of course playing him as a prepper and kind of that counterculture.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
And even hearing the early feeds on what was going on with Far Cry 5 and the cult, and that a whole bunch of people, that sort of aspect of America that
Yeah,
kind
I
of
thought that was a
Yeah.
really ballsy approach to do like homegrown white terrorist sort of thing.
yeah, exactly, man.
Yeah.
And I love it. I try to love everybody, and but there's certain things, and even when you drive through those parts of America, and whatever the reason, I mean, I'm not here to judge, kind of
Nope.
thing, but you get that scary militant militia aspect of things where
Yeah.
up in the boot
Yeah.
they take things
I
into
mean,
their own
I
hands.
imagine it gives them some illusion of like comfort. Like it relieves a certain anxiety that maybe they can't even name.
Uh, Absolutely, and even down to the politics of it, and there's a lot of people
Hmm.
that it's kind of the anti-government thing, which is cool from a counterculture viewpoint. But when it's anti-government to sort of take things into your own hands and start spouting vile nonsense and all that kind of stuff, then it hits hard,
Yeah, there's
And
a difference between revolutionary and racism.
Yeah.
exactly. And so I was honored to sort of get Dutch, where it was like, oh, I'm going to be joining. That's the resistance, and from a very kind of wise and sort of ancient philosophy. I don't want to go too thick on it or too rich on it, but the value system that he represents and the kind of fight that he's involved in that little corner of the world, you know. And I kind of felt the relationships to what's going on in Watch Dogs too, with T-Bone and fighting the good fight and the
Yeah.
white hat hackers,
Hmm.
and doing everything to fight against these kind of global corporations and the control that we have no idea that's happening.
Yeah, definitely.
So kind of see Dutch in the same way. It's kind of fun.
Yeah. So it sounds like you maybe take a lot of roles because they speak to you.
Absolutely. I mean, as an actor, you have to kind of be open to what comes down the pipe, right? Because I've got agents and I've got casting agents and casting directors who, for the most part, are looking out for my best interests. And so you definitely have a choice. There's always a choice in terms of the roles you take, but it's so neat when you get guys like the growth of T-Bone and the growth of Dutch as well, from the initial kind of conversations and the initial casting, and then the kind of the warps and the warping that you go through to get the character right, in terms of what we end up with as I guess, the skin, right? Like,
Yeah.
because
Okay.
they're always working off me and they're always working off my energy and my kind of sensibilities, I suppose. Being a method actor, it's even the way they made T-Bone look at the beginning. It was all based on the original audition I did for it way back, and they were using copy from Splinter Cell, and kind of some of their stuff worked in, but of course they don't want any kind of script leaks or anything like that. So they're very, the project's called this, and it's nothing, we're just trying to get characters together. And so you're reading other material, but you're reading it as that character of Ray Kenny or T-Bone, or in Dutch's case as well, because they're all kind of these secretive characters, as well as the process is sort of secret.
Yeah.
And when I went in for the final audition, they were talking about, we have this thing where actors always game up. We have an expression for it, which is gaming up. And it's kind of like everybody assumes this kind of larger than life stance. And
yeah.
Chris Evans in Captain America. And it's like, get out of the car, I said. And Kuhn, the original director, and Lars Bonde turned to me and said, we're after you. You don't really have to reach for this character. So here, come around and look at the screen. And they showed me an early prototype. And I was like, oh my God, it's me with dreads.
It's so cool.
Well, it's kind of neat because sometimes you go away from that, especially if you're Benedict Cumberbatch playing Smaug. And, all of a sudden you're playing this giant creature, or Mark Ruffalo with the Hulk, right? So you're still in the mocap suit, but everybody has to treat you like, a 15-foot monster or whatever.
Yeah.
So when it's drawn after yourself, and even Dutch, it was funny because they kind of made him look like Dan, and Dan Hay, one of the executive producers. And so the bald and the goatee, but it's still, you can still see me in there, kind of in the twinkle in the eye or something.
Yeah. You could still see a bit of Johnny Tench in there.
Yeah. Well, it captured you.
No. Yeah. Well, absolutely. And it's and even the stances and things like that. There's shots where you sit in a chair or something, and you develop a kind of a way of that muscle memory, that muscle movement, I guess. And I know with T-Bone, it was kind of lanky and anarchic, and kind of, finger on the button sort of. And with Dutch, it's kind of contained and martial, and very sort of self-protective in a way. So even the body language comes to play, especially in mocap, because it's such a fascinating medium to work in, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Because you're using mime, and you're using imagination, and trying to, see things in your mind's eye that aren't there. Or that, the whole hideout in Watch Dogs 2 was basically just a bunch of plywood tables, 2x4 construction, like something you'd have up at your cottage or in the shed.
Yeah.
And then you're playing, no, it's covered in computers and maps and, equipment. And so you kind of have to play that sort of mime style of it, which is great. Then it brings out the theater. And, I had a lot, my early training in that was theater. And
well, I guess that leads me to the first question I'd like to ask. What inspired you to start acting?
Gosh, I come from a long line, I guess. Not really. I mean, it's definitely in my blood, in my genetic makeup. But I sort of have always been a storyteller. Like, I went to camp when I was young, like wilderness camps and things like that. And they had bonfires, and I'd always get up and tell some ghost story or some joke, or and I guess being the fifth child of I'm the baby of 5, and I always had to get my oar in. So again, the storyteller comes into play, and I was acting out stuff. And then in high school, I had a great Woodruff High School in Ottawa. I had a fantastic theater arts teacher who kind of inspired me, and that was the first glimmerings. And I took part in a couple of school plays. Saw my older sister in a production of Tennessee Williams' Camino Royale. And at the
Wow.
time when I was going through early high school, it was all the post, you know, like the mid 70s kind of thing. So there was all that post Vietnam War stuff, and there was a lot of great experimental environmental theater. It was definitely the sign of the times, the sort of zeitgeist, I guess, of like what was going on in New York and with the environmental theaters and what was going on with Peter Brook and all that. So it was a very exciting, engaging time. And then I came out of high school. Uh, I did a production actually of The Further Adventures of Nick Danger, which is an old Fire Sound Theater radio hour. I got to direct that and act in that and get all my classmates or all my drama school mates in that. And then after I graduated from high school, a friend offered me a position as at a place near my parents had bought this farm up in Omimi and near Peterborough. And a friend called me up and he said, "What are you doing for the summer?" And he offered me a job. They were looking for technicians and things like that for the Peterborough Summer Theatre Company. And it was a group that came up from Toronto, all these kind of hip, groovy theater types. And I got hired as the lighting apprentice and the carpenter. And I kind of said, well, I want to be an actor. I
Whoa.
don't really know much about
Yeah.
lighting. I know some carpentry. And they said, oh, well, you can watch the actors, and this is a great group, and you might even be able to understudy some of the roles. So long story short, I went back to Toronto with them, got into the Toronto theater scene, and then my dad had a deal with me. He said, okay, if you want to do this as a career, you have to get a post-secondary education. So I found a school that taught, had an exchange program between the British American Academy, between New York and London, England. And so I signed on for like their 2-year program and did that, and got exposed to Europe and the whole theater scene over there, and came back and started doing a bunch of theater, and then gradually got into, again, from a financial viewpoint, you make a lot more money in film and television. So I got a film and TV agent because, again, my folks wanted me to make more money than just, profit share
Yeah.
$70
Yeah.
a week doing a theater show. Unfortunately, it often is, but I'd got tied on to some major theater companies and had got equity and got into Canadian Actors Equity and promptly got my film and television agents, my first film and TV agent, and then the rest is kind of history. So it's something I wanted to do since I was like probably about 16, 17, like as a career. And then by 18, 19, I was kind of starting to do it, and then went off and got educated. And then, and they've been very great to me. And I work a lot in a lot of different mediums, a lot of voice. So I moved around a fair bit. I'm a bit of a traveler, I guess, in that sense, a journeyman actor. Like the guys in The Players King and Hamlet. So I moved out to Vancouver after a while to take advantage of a big production glut out there, a lot of runaway production from LA. And that I used as a springboard down to Los Angeles and spent about 8 years down there. And then there was so much production coming in Canada, I was flying back up here to work. So we decided to move back to Canada. And then, and at that time, there was a lot of varied work, I guess. I kept doing theater, of course, and then there was a lot of film and television, a lot of sci-fi.
Yeah,
Most
I've seen you. I didn't realize I'd seen you in a lot of like little like Canadian shot sci-fi shows over the years,
yeah,
like
yeah.
Sanctuary and stuff like that.
Well, yeah, there's a mixture of indie and even stuff like I was once at one of the fan expos, and DB Sugar, JB Sugar, the director of producer of Bitten, I ran into him outside, and he said, "Man, you should get in there. Look, I think every show you've done is you've been in every show in there." And we made a joke about getting like a T-shirt done the John Tench tour, and then Supernatural, Sanctuary, Outer Limits, because we go back to X-Files too, and the original
Yeah.
X-Files. That was one of my
Yeah. The best X-Files.
Oh, it was a lot of fun, man. And that was actually after I just moved down to LA, and then they brought me back up to do the F. Emasculata episode about the weird bug from South America.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So sci-fi is great because you get to be a bit more working in that fantasy sci-fi world, and I've always loved sci-fi from a reading viewpoint, even as a young guy, even before I got into acting. Asimov and Heinlein and Philip K. Dick.
Asimov's the stuff, man. I love hard sci-fi like that.
Yeah, and growing up with that helps in the long run, and when you're going into audition for those kind of shows. And Vancouver was a very busy time, like iconic shows now, The Crow, Stairway to Heaven with Mark Dacascos, the remake of The Crow, and getting a chance to play Top Dollar in that, T-Bird, and working with Top Dollar, who a friend of mine had originally played in the original movie with Brandon Lee. So those kind of experiences, and then all the actioneers too, so it was a very busy time. And what was the other thing? Oh, Andromeda.
Oh yeah, Andromeda.
Yeah, I got to play Gerontex on that, and that was kind of neat. That was a pretty neat show because they brought in some elements of Harry Harrison, the sci-fi, great writer who wrote The Stainless Steel Rat. And so they tried to get a bit outside with it, which is what I like about the sci-fi.
Yeah, for sure. And there's a lot of room to experiment. Yeah,
and not a little bit of anti-reality, alternate dimension stuff. So I like that. So yeah, through the years, the sci-fi has been really good to me, and I've had the opportunity to play a lot of wacky, great different characters. And then along came mocap. It's a whole other drawer. A whole other
definitely.
And originally in the early days, as voice, like I mentioned before, and Nikita, I know there's do a lot of dialects, and accents. And and so then you're a shoe-in for cartoon, because whether they want the weirdest one once I had was a New Jersey gangster who's actually Korean. So for Fritz, or it was for Felix the Cat, I think, the remake of Felix the Cat.
Yes.
Joe Pesci sort of New Jersey voice, right, where you're sort of talking in that through the nose, and then
I love it.
And then adding a Korean on top of that, so it became weird. And affirmative action and all that. I was saying, you guys can't find a Korean who could
you can't find a Korean who grew up in New Jersey? They don't exist?
No, especially in Los Angeles, right? And because there's a big, community of and stuff for sure. But they couldn't get somebody to do the sort of Joe Pesci, and they'd heard I did a kind of a Joe Pesci New Jersey thing. So it was the combination of stuff. So often you get asked to do this pretty interesting stuff in voice. Different accents and stuff like that. Nikita, South Africa, I had a chance to go out for Neil Blomkamp, I think, in Elysium, and African on him, and Neil Blomkamp, after all.
This is amazing.
Well, he said, you've got a great South African accent, one of the best in audition, and I'm just sort of pulling it out of the hat right now. But often, even the chance to work on stuff like that and trying to make it authentic and make it sound like, you're
perfect
from that part, and then not going to New Zealand on it or something like that. So then, consequently, you get a lot of opportunity to do a lot of different use of that, and then that leading to mocap. All of a sudden, we started auditioning for these video games early, Splinter Cell and even GTA 1.
Yeah.
I could almost hear you using air quotes when you said video games there.
I did. Because at that point it wasn't really
right.
And I'm talking like when they first started out, right?
Oh, I totally get it.
Yeah, yeah.
You're an actor, and they want you to do this video game.
Mhm. And you'd go into these strange little sound studios, and at that point, it was all voice
Mm-hmm.
because they used a lot of athletes, and especially in the early EA Electronics Arts, and even maybe some of the Rockstar stuff, where they they were using principally athletes coming over from the John Madden game,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
baseball and basketball games and stuff, and then they combined that with some of the action stuff. So they were using stunt guys. And at that point, I don't even think they had the helmet cams. It was all early volume recording of, the skeletals and stuff, but it was still pretty basic. So they'd do all the voice afterwards in post. And so you were hitting these kind of mouth flaps where the actor would just say gobbly, or the stunt guy would just yell a bunch of stuff, and then they'd write it. You put it in, try and match whatever mouth movements they had.
Right.
So it was very basic and very like, drop the gun, motherfucker, get out of the car.
Yeah, and you have to ad lib a bunch of little embellishments to make it match.
Yeah, like little grunts. Predominantly, in a lot of that early stuff, it was a lot of fighting and a lot of
Yeah.
Yeah.
So they needed the cartoon guys because we could all do that, okay, fall down 5 flights of stairs and make it sound weird. or laugh, and you're like, no, not that kind of laugh, like a real laugh. Okay, now combine the two. And so it became
combine the two.
putting it in, and then they get, if you didn't quite hit the sync, they'd be, oh, look, we can move it, we can fudge it, don't worry about it. And then I think it was about probably 6-7 years ago, where all of a sudden it started getting much more authentic, and the volumes and camera started getting much more sophisticated, and then suddenly it became, we were auditioning for these things where we were actually doing the movement as well, and then it took off, and then suddenly it's like, especially in Canada, Ubisoft, and but throughout the world, in America, with some of the big companies, EA and Rockstar and things like that. So
yeah, absolutely.
And they need that type of actor who can not just act, but at the same time, sophisticated facial movements and things like that. And and it kind of came out of left field, and we all kind of learned it as we went. And then the guys who have been doing the stunts and doing the incidental daily stuff were instrumental in helping you out when you came in and you didn't quite know what you were doing, right? It was kind of like, oh yeah, you got to do T-pose, you got to do this, you got to. So suddenly you've got this whole technical world you're working in, and certain people, like, when you flub a line in the middle of a speech or something, and then we go, oh, can we go back on that? And it's like, no, man, this is all live off the floor. There's no cuts. It's like doing theater. So consequently, it's very unlike shooting television and film where you get
but it sounds like
that's pressure.
Yeah, it's pretty fascinating in terms of the way you have to adapt to it or adjust to it.
It really sounds like a synthesis of your two skill sets. Like your
Absolutely.
film and television acting is like the more subtle things, the facial expressions, while your film experience is the more grandiose gestures and your ability to get your lines the first time and
absolutely and honing down those units and beats like in the Stanislavski system, and making it make sense to you, the actor, so you can play it truthfully as you, the character. And then, but on TV, it's I'm fond of saying, in theater you waggle the eyebrow, in TV you kind of flick the eyebrow, and in film just think about the eyebrow, and that because it's so close and so big, and often on 70 mil screens or even in the cineplexes and stuff, where it's a big experience, so you have to really kind of turn down, and play to the room rather than play to the mic, and play to the camera rather than play to the room. And then in mocap, it's kind of a combination of, like in performance capture, where you got to keep it moving, because movement is part of the game, and you got to be aware of, like, you know, the movement even left to right across the screen. And generally, once they get the scene mapped out and what we call blocked, then they've got like all the cameras around the room in the volume. So there's like, you know, there's like 40 cameras on posts around the room, and then there's 3 or 4 guys who follow you, and because they're not in light suits, you don't see them, right? So on the skeletal in the floor recording, they're invisible basically, but they're there right up with you, getting all the close-ups on the fly. So it's like shooting a big master with 5 cameras. And
wow.
so that frees you up a lot too. But at the same time, like I said before, once you call action, you get to go through the whole scene, no breaks, right? And so you have to rely upon the theater, you have to rely upon the technical, because you got to watch out for the handheld cameras rolling around you. You've got to make the movements synthetic and at the same time usable. You're imagining that sort of table full of gack and clutter in front of you, you know, and the little wooden block that you pick up is actually a grenade with, you know, tweaks on it. So it's pretty neat. It's I love it though, because it requires that skill set. You have to kind of bring everything to the fore, and then you've got this weird kind of loose suit. So you're zipped up in this very tight fitting, you know, Olympic athletic suit. And then you've got little light balls all over, and you're kind of velcroed in, right? Once they snap you in, everything has to be lined up for the cameras and for the motion capture. And then you've got a helmet with a camera and a light system and a camera system and a mic system. Oh, and that was the one thing in the early days, before they went remote, you were even attached to this big sort of cable. Now they have the cable running down your back and you were remote. So you're kind of like a little cyborg running around.
Whoa.
Yeah. And it becomes very athletic and very movement oriented, of course. And at the same time, you've got that's what I love about the sophistication of how they've gotten. You watch some of the cinematics, and like even what some of the things Greg pulled out of his acting hat on playing the father in Far Cry 5.
Yeah.
Just incredible, you know. And the more brilliant the equipment gets, the more sophisticated the equipment gets, then the more sophisticated the performance are, and they're developing a really great understanding of that, you know, because they're gigantic scripts too. Like when you think about it, I think the original Watch Dogs 1 was probably like 200 pages of intense, you know, action, and whenever the gaming part comes up, there's always just this little block in the writing that's kind of got a different color.
Yeah. It's not really considered like proper acting yet, I don't think.
No, and it's because of that you get that sort of like, you know, all that stuff in the script that's code or whatever, and then they're just, that's just the coded script for the animators. And then so you realize during that time you break out of cinematics and go, so it's like a scene break, I guess. But then you get these massive scripts that have to be kept under wraps. So you usually turnaround process is very, very quick in terms of from learning the script, the first table read, and then jumping into it the next day kind of thing. And they're pretty good about setting it up. They're getting better at it too. There's times where, guys, we're going to camera tomorrow. We got to stop the discussions about whether this dialogue works, and we'll make it work. But and they hire great writers. And there's an old actor joke where a table read, which is where all the actors, you know, get together and read the script for the first time. And we always say a table read is where a bunch of actors get together and tell a bunch of highly paid professional writers how to write. So I'm more of the camp where the script, you can always make adjustments and things like that. But like Shakespeare, the writer spent a lot of time getting it right. And if you come along and ad lib a bunch of stuff or question a bunch of stuff, say, I don't know if my character would say this, it's like, well, that's not your job, really. My job is to interpret what the great projects that have been given me, right? And then it's a trust thing. And once I started seeing the material with both T-Bone, of course, and Dutch, it's just awesome,